Okay, welcome everybody to the UCAP Alumni Panel for Australia and New Zealand. My name is Rachel Rigoli, and I am an advisor at the UC San Diego Study Abroad office. And I am also alum of the UCAP Australia program. I studied for a year at Melbourne University when I was an undergrad at UC Irvine, way back when. And I have a son who is a UC Santa Cruz senior, and he's also on a UCAP program, and he's studying at the University of Sydney. So I have a lot of connections to Australia, and I'm also the advisor for Australia and New Zealand at our office. So I'm excited to facilitate this panel today. And we have 7 wonderful panelists here. Do I have 7, or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or am I missing anybody? I think I don't know
I
if I
think
got it.
there's 6 of us.
Oh, 6. Okay, so I think we're missing somebody, but I'm sure they'll join soon. So let's go ahead and get started. We'd like to first know who's in the audience. So if you can put in the chat, tell us about yourself, what UC campus you're from, what your major is, and then what country you're going to. Are you going to Australia or New Zealand, and which university or program that you're going on, and tell us why you chose your program. So that's going to help us when we, go along in the panel to know who is in attendance today. The other thing I want to mention is don't forget to connect with each other. And if you haven't already, make sure you join the UCAP Discord group. I can send a link in the chat, or if one of the panelists, if you want to go to the Google Doc, it's in there. If you want to put it in the chat, that would be great. Also, what I've seen students do before is that they've created their own Discord group for the country and the program term that they're going. And so if anybody in this session today wants to create a Discord group for like Australia Fall 2024 or New Zealand Fall 2024 and take the lead and send that information to Amy Froelich, who is your UCAP Australia New Zealand advisor, at the system-wide office, you can let her know the Discord name and ask her to send that information out to everybody. So here's today's schedule. It's going to be pretty informal. It's only an hour, and if we finish early, we'll be able to sign off. If it goes a little longer and the panelists are okay staying a little bit longer, we'll answer all your questions today. So as I mentioned, we have a wonderful group of alumni who studied abroad in Australia or New Zealand who are here today to answer all your questions. And we're going to start with introductions, and then we will answer questions that you submitted during the registration process. And there were lots of thoughtful questions that you submitted, so we will be answering those. And then we're going to open it to Q&A. So if anything comes up during the session, you can feel free to ask those questions at the end. So let's start with introductions. Sydney, you are first on the slide. So why don't we go ahead and start with you? If you could say what your major is too, besides what campus you're from, where you studied, and then a memorable experience that you had in your study abroad country or program.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, my name's Sydney. So it was really funny that I was studying in Sydney. Got comments on that every single day. And I was named after Sydney, so they also thought that was funny. But yeah, I went to UNSW and I just graduated from UCSB 3 weeks ago. I went to Sydney this past fall. So I got back in January, had one more quarter at UCSB and graduated. And I was a double major with econ and communication. Um, one of the most memorable memories was I didn't get to go to the opera house till the second day, but just seeing the opera house was like it was like more than I could have ever imagined. And I didn't really know that much about Australia before I went there, but I didn't know that the harbor bridge was also next to it and like everything is on the water. But every time I saw the opera house, like it never got any less beautiful. And I miss it so much.
Thank you, Sydney. I don't think Joyce is here. Joyce, are you here? You can unmute if you are. Okay, I don't think Joyce is here. So Tasha, you're next.
Hi, my name is Tasha Nguyen. I go to UCSD and I'm a bioinformatics major with a minor in computer science and chemistry. I studied at the University of Sydney and I also took a picture of the Sydney Opera House. I think one of my most memorable experiences was like right before I went back home. I like woke up really early and decided to do like the Bondi to Coogee walk by myself. And that was just like really pretty and it was raining. And it was just like a nice way to close out the whole experience.
Awesome. Thank you. Whitney, you're up next.
Hi, my name's Whitney. I went to UC Santa Barbara and I was a communication major with an emphasis in marketing. I actually graduated a year ago, last June. And my picture is at the Royal National Park, which is a super cool national park in Sydney. And I would say one of my most memorable experiences and something that was pretty unique to my experience was I actually got a job while I was there. And I wasn't necessarily planning on doing that, but it kind of just happened spontaneously. So I was a bartender at one of the local bars that all the abroad kids in my city went to. So that was a super fun experience, got to make a little money, have a lot of fun. And that was the way I met a lot more local people and people that were living in Sydney outside of just my study abroad group. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our New Zealand panelist. Rania, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, so my name's Rania. I'm from UC Santa Barbara. I'm graduating this June and I'm a major in environmental studies. I went to the University of Canterbury and one of my favorite memories was I did an 8-day backpacking trip after the term ended, and that's the longest I've ever been backpacking, but it was super fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Nia?
Hello, I'm Mia. I am at UCLA. I'm graduating this quarter at the end of the spring. I'm a sociology major, and I studied abroad this past fall at the University of Otago in New Zealand. And one of my favorite memories, I feel like I've thought about this question so much, and I still cannot give a good answer because everything was just so formative to my experience. But something I do share a lot is this trip I went on in the middle of the semester on this semester break that we had. It was called the Greenstone Caples Track, which I highly recommend for anyone that's going to be in the South Island of New Zealand. But that was similarly like a really intensive backpacking track, and I hadn't done anything like that before. And I just remember feeling like pure joy and freedom in a way that I had not experienced before, or since I was like a child. Like it just brought something out of me that I hadn't felt in a really long time. So it was incredible.
Thank you. And I know like a lot of, if you're going to Australia, you may be traveling to New Zealand. And if you're studying in New Zealand, you may be traveling to Australia. So definitely listen to those travel tips and make note of that. Okay, Izzy, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Izzy. I'm a third year at UCSB studying environmental studies and ecology. I was in Victoria University of Wellington in the summer and fall because you start in July. Um, I would say I also did a whole lot of backpacking, a whole lot of camping. Um, you get a 2-week break in the middle of your trimester, and I did a road trip around the South Island with my housemates, and that was so much fun and really cool.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. I really appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go to questions, and these were the questions that you all submitted when you did your registration, and I didn't there were a few that were very specific, so I did leave those out, and I asked that you, reach out to your home campus study abroad advisor for Australia or New Zealand if you want to get in touch with alumni who went where you're going. Like maybe there's not a panelist here today representing your partner or the university where you're studying at in the fall. But if one of the panelists could drop in all the email addresses from the Google chat, I'd really appreciate it. I didn't want it on the slide because, this is being recorded, but feel free to also reach out to any of the panelists. They've all graciously agreed to share their contact information and answer any specific questions that may come up after this session. But for today's panel, we're going to just keep it very general because, you're all going to different locations, and I didn't want to get into really specific questions like which dorm do you recommend at Melbourne Uni, or which class should I take at UNSW, that kind of thing. So we're going to start with academics. This is one of the questions that was submitted. And the question is, how do the academics differ from the United States? And I'm really hoping that we can have at least one panelist from Australia and one panelist from New Zealand to answer this question, and then others can also jump in. So is there anyone from Australia or New Zealand, if you want to raise your hand or just unmute, whatever works best? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. So I found it to be way more chill than it is in the quarter system, at least. And the way their grading is a lot more based on like bigger assignments. So you'll take the same class for 12 weeks, and your grade will be based on like 3 to 4 like big essays or group projects or tests versus like the kind of busy work and like weekly quizzes that you have here. And I still felt like I learned a lot, and I felt like I didn't learn less than here, but I also felt like I was not as stressed and I could like actually like go places on weekends. And then in New Zealand, it's really nice because halfway through, so you'll have 6 weeks of class and then you'll have a 2 or 3 week break. And to just, they're like, oh, it's a study break, but I just traveled the whole time. And then you'll have another 6 weeks, and then you have, at least for me, I had a week of like study break before finals and then a couple weeks of finals, but I only had like one in-person final. So I also traveled a bunch there. Um, so yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to pitch in.
Yeah, I went to Australia, and I also found the academics really chill. And just like also how the classes are laid out. Like I'm not sure how it worked in New Zealand, but we basically only had lecture once a week for like 3 hours kind of. So like I was taking 4 classes, but I only had classes on like 3 days of the week. So like I had really long weekends, I could do an internship, all that sort of stuff. And just the grading scale is also really different. So like a 90% here, like in America, is obviously like an A range, but over in Australia, I think I don't remember what it was specifically, but it was like in the 80s or 70s. So like don't get too scared about the grading scale. Like it'll only benefit you. But that was probably one of the funny things that I thought, because it was like, wow, I'm getting like a 70% on my essay, but like that's actually kind of okay.
Anyone else want to jump in about academics?
I would just say the professors are, at least in New Zealand, or at least my professors were pretty laid back, and they love to talk to exchange students. And I had a few I talked to, and I was like, I'm an exchange student, and I want to travel around. And I got to take a midterm or a final slightly later because I was in Fiji. So, and he did not care at all. So, um, they definitely want you to prioritize like experiencing a new country. And so I think, and they love to hear about your experiences as well. So getting to know your professors is really, I found a lot easier than it is at UC Santa Barbara.
I think I had a little bit different of experience, but then I also found out like when I was there, like UNSW is like considered like they try to say it's like an Ivy League of Australia, like it's like number 1 or 2 in Australia, so they're like super competitive about that. But I thought that the hardest thing for me was that like usually you could like go to like a TA's office hours and they would like work through. I took like one of my hardest classes of college there, and it was definitely easier there than it would have been at UC Santa Barbara, but there was less like resources. Like I had to try a lot harder to find resources. And like usually it's like you have like a problem set for practice, like in at UCSB, like they'll post the answers after to like make sure you could check everything. But I'd be like turning in homework and never getting like confirmation if it was right. And that was like the hardest part for me. But I was also a little bit frustrated that like all the classes I wanted to take, I had like 10 different courses I could take to like count like towards academic progress at Santa Barbara. And like 90% of them were online. So I literally like switched classes to make sure I had at least like one in-person class, because originally my classes were 100% online, and I was like, I didn't like come here to study to take online classes. But I feel like it definitely like differs per school, and like what you put into it, you get out of it.
Sydney, can I ask you just real fast, were they still transitioning from online courses because of the pandemic, or do you think maybe it's
No,
happening?
I had one class that was in-person in-person lecture and in-person section, and the section was optional. I had one that was 100% online class, and it was a social media class, so that makes sense. And the sections were all optional, but they call them tutorials. And then my other class was online lectures that were like recorded and not mandatory, and then in-person section that was optional, but like literally all the classes had like at least hybrid.
Okay, good to know. Okay, Whitney, sorry, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, I honestly forgot about that until Sydney mentioned it. At the University of Sydney, I found out, I was surprised to learn that virtual class was not a COVID thing for them. Like that was happening long before COVID. Like apparently that was happening like when people used to have to go get like tapes from the library and stuff. Like they've always done that. And the sort of thing where a lot of lectures were online, but then my tutorials at least were in person and attendance was mandatory, but you could miss some of them. So I think that's something to know going in. I don't know if that's all Australia thing, but lectures being virtual. Because at first I kind of was like, what the heck? But that's just a thing somehow. So that is something to note.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to campus and social life. There were a lot of questions about how to connect with local students, how to get involved on campus. So how about someone from the Australia alums? Like, do you have any recommendations?
I can talk about that a little bit. Something that is very different, again, I can only speak for Australia versus New Zealand, is that college, university is very different there. It's not like people are leaving home to go to college and it's a social experience. Most people are, locals at least, are living at home, commuting to class. So like they're not on campus to make friends and socialize kind of the way that we went to college. So it's a little bit more difficult to meet people that are like local, because they go to class, they do their thing, they go back home. So I think if it's important to you to meet locals to where you're living, you have to make more of an effort, which is not a bad thing at all. Something that I would recommend is I had a friend that was on the sports team, so I always went to the sports games. I had a class that like had us attend things. Like I went to an AFL game, I'll go to rugby games, we went to a horse race. Like if you want to meet local people, you have to make a little bit more of an effort, just because the way that they aren't going to college to make friends the way that we sort of did that. So that's a little bit different. And also like getting a job, getting involved in clubs. There was tons of clubs. There was like a huge club fair in the very beginning of my experience, at least. So that's something to know when you're going in. If you're expecting to just kind of like make friends on campus, it's a little bit more of an effort than that.
Anyone from the New Zealand alum could share their experience?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Nia,
No,
did you want
go
to
for
go?
it. Go for it.
Okay. I was going to say that, yeah, clubs were super active at my uni as well. And a lot of locals did it. And I don't think it was quite the same um, with like people just coming to campus. Like people definitely lived on campus as well. And like in the surrounding areas, in flats, they call them instead of apartments. It's usually like a little house. But yeah, definitely the clubs. I was in several of the clubs, including the tramping club, like I was saying in the chat, and they did a lot of like backpacking trips and made it super easy. Um, and met a lot of local people that way who I'm like still in contact with.
Nia, did you want to add something? I know you were also getting ready to talk.
Yeah, I was gonna say I do agree with the sentiment that it can be a little bit harder to reach out to local students. I think that was something um, a lot of people experienced in my program as well in New Zealand. But I think the good thing about the UCEAP programs is that you're so immersed as kind of belonging as a local student. So there are so many opportunities just in any class to talk to locals because it's not like you're just subject to being only with other exchange students. Um, And then this kind of seeps into housing a little bit, but I, at Otago specifically, I don't know if there's anyone here yet that is going to Otago, but I lived with a local student. The way that they set up our housing was we were paired with other exchange students, and then we were in the flats, the uni flats, and then every flat also had a Kiwi student or a Kiwi host, as they called them, that was supposed to kind of be our guide. And I met a lot of people through mine because we just got along so well. So that was another resource, I guess, for meeting people and making a lot of friends.
Okay, well, that's a great segue into housing. So thank you for that. What if hopefully you all don't mind, but and Izzy, you're at the top of my screen, maybe you all could just go briefly like what your housing was like and then how you found it. Because there was definitely a lot of specific questions about housing, like how do I get it? Where should I live? So I think just explaining where you lived, were you mainly with international students? Were you with other, were you with local students? And then how you were able to secure your housing?
Yeah. So for Victoria University of Wellington, I'm pretty sure we were guaranteed housing, like student accommodation as exchange students. So I just applied and I had to request an early move-in, um, which kind of made it a little bit difficult. I knew some people who actually stayed in hostels for the first 2 weeks because orientation is before move-in technically. So some people stayed in hostels, but I fortunately got early move-in. Um, I got to like rank housing kind of like you do in freshman year because it is university accommodation. And I was put in an 18-person house. And was not nobody was told that until we landed in New Zealand. Um, I was fortunate enough to I attended this same thing and I met someone who was abroad in that fall. She gave me her Instagram and I DM'd her and I said, "This is my address in Wellington. Is this a good house?" And she was like, "Oh, that's where I lived. It's 18 people, just warning you. Nobody else knows." Um, so I mean, it was all exchange students. I think we had one Kiwi and then one moved in later and made it 18, like halfway through the year. So I definitely had a unique experience, but because we were all exchange students, we all were very determined to do everything. And so it kind of worked out and they became like my best friends. So I would say I didn't really like my housing didn't allow me to meet locals, but I did meet the other exchange students. But if anyone is going to Victoria University of Wellington and want to ask me about their address, I can warn you because there are a lot of unhappy people flying across the world, being informed that they're basically living in a frat house.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone living with 18 people total. That's that would be a shock. Nia, I'm going to skip you if you don't mind because you did share a little bit about your housing. And so Rania, you want to just briefly mention where you lived?
Yeah, I also lived in the university accommodations. I don't know if it's the same system, but it was called Unilodge. And you just basically like applied online and it might have been guaranteed to get housing. I think so for internationals. And I lived in like a little apartment with 5 people. We each had our own room, which was nice, and then shared a kitchen. And then there were like little houses and each one had like 4 apartments. Um, and yeah, I got pretty close with some of the people I lived with. They were all exchange students. Um, 4 of them were from the US and then one was from Denmark. And um, but yeah, I got really close to some of them. But not a ton of like locals in like the area where I was. It was also more like graduate student housing that they put us in, like that style, versus there was like a more of like a dorm style like party area that um Ilum apartments for anybody going there is a little crazy there. I was kind of glad I didn't live over there. But yeah, it was chill.
Thanks. Okay, Sydney, how about your accommodations?
I got so lucky. I don't know what happened with mine. Basically, I got offered, I applied. I was super worried about getting housing because I was trying to look at, they sent me like some websites to like find housing, and it was like, it just wasn't working for me. And so I applied through the university, like first day the application opens, like I was ready. And then I got a lease, but the lease was like ended like January 15th and classes ended like December 23rd. And I was like, I don't want to pay a full month extra of rent. So I like declined the lease. And then I applied again and I got the same lease again. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is like my only option. So I kind of like made the most of it and I stayed till I came back. My classes started again January 7th and I came back January 5th. I was able to extend my flight for free. But apparently the place I stayed in was like the bougiest, like nicest apartments on campus, and it was like in the center of everything, and there's like a 500-person wait list for it. So I don't know how I got it for one term, but I just applied like super fast, and I don't even know if there was like a written part of the application, but yeah, just like being on top of it, because kind of finding the off-campus ones is super hard, especially for like one term.
Thank you. Tasha?
Yeah, so before like I got housing, I think the University of Sydney actually like sent us out an email or something that was like, you have two options. You can either do Queen Mary building, which is like the actual on-campus accommodation, which is like all singles and like a massive kitchen floor, or you can go do one of their like partnership accommodation kind of places. So I guess that includes like Uni Lodge or like Scape. When I did it, it was Scape housing. So I missed the deadline for the on-campus housing, so I ended up doing the Scape housing. And honestly, it was okay. It was mostly international students, and like they adjust the leases and like the length of them to like your specific semester. And they claim it's cheaper. I think they're lying, but like they're like, oh yeah, it's cheaper. But yeah, I mostly live with international students. There were like two from India, one from France, a few from China, Hong Kong. It was really diverse, but like kind of with the same social life sort of thing. I didn't meet that many locals unless I was in class. So I mostly hung out with the girls I lived with.
Thank you. Whitney?
So I also lived in Scape complexes, but for me, it slayed. I had an awesome experience, luckily. I don't know. I'm pretty sure all of Australia, at least Sydney, I was given basically a link to like the Scape page, and there's a bunch of different Scape buildings in Sydney. So if anybody wants to know about the specifics of them, they can talk to me about it. I kind of lucked out in my situation. I didn't really know the one that I picked. It was somewhat arbitrary, the reason that I picked it, but it ended up being the newest, nicest building. It was super awesome. It was like right next to a train station. It was 20 stories, had all of these cool facilities. It was full of exchange students. I met so many friends there from all over the world. My like specific accommodation, it honestly was kind of like I had my own room, but there was like 5 girls that each had their own room and we shared a common space. And so I didn't really end up hanging out with the other people that were in my actual living situation. It was like 4 girls from different parts of the world, but I ended up meeting people. This actually was really cool. On one of my first couple days there was just a group of people that were hanging out down. This was like a 20-story building, and downstairs there was a group of people hanging out there. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go walk over to them and say hi. And that ended up being like this massive friend group from all over the world that I hung out with for the whole entire time. And we made other friends in other Scape buildings, and they all had pro cons. But yeah, I lucked out and I would recommend that. And if anyone has specific questions, they can ask.
I'm just going to jump in. I mean, you all probably have heard a theme that it was mainly living with other exchange students or international students. And in general, a lot of Australians or New Zealand university students live at home. And the ones that do move out, they tend to look for apartments or flats. So if you do want that experience to live with local students, you're going to probably have to, take the leap and try and find a 1 semester, room in a flat. And that's not so easy unless you're going for the full year. And then there's also residential colleges as well, which are typically all local students. But the easiest typically is to just go ahead and take the accommodations that the university is offering, which is set up for international and exchange students. So just to add that in there. Okay, let's move on to costs and budgets. One of the questions was about prices in Australia and New Zealand. So if we could get someone from who studied in Australia and someone who studied in New Zealand, and then others feel free to jump in. But did you pay about what you expected? Did you stick to the budget that EAP was, that gave you? And do you feel like the prices were about the same, more or less? So just raise your hand if you have anything you want to share.
I found the pricing to be cheaper compared to like LA, Santa Barbara prices, or even like the Bay Area. I feel like California is just really expensive. But like my friends who were from the East Coast, they said they felt like Sydney was more expensive. But the way that I saw it was like if you're going to get an avocado toast, like it's like the same price in Australian dollars, but then there's a discount for what you get for your money because it's like a 30% discount with like you're paying with like US dollars, if that makes sense, because of the conversion rate. But for like reference, my rent there was 350 Australian dollars a week, which is like 250 American dollars. And my rent in like the US is like 1,200 US dollars a month. So
What about our New Zealand alum? What did you all think?
I was gonna say something similar. I'm not from California, so California prices are already a little more expensive than what I'm usually used to. And I would say New Zealand was pretty comparable to California. Um, I found it a little expensive, but people like I made friends with from California said it was pretty much comparable.
Okay, let's move on to culture. One of the questions was, what are the cultural differences between the US and Australia and New Zealand? And I know that's a huge question, right? And there's lots of books written about all this. But if you were to give a very short answer, what would you have to say?
I think it is a really loaded question. I think for New Zealand, there are a lot of cultural differences. I think there are some that are more obvious or kind of more fun, just things that jump out at you that you've noticed, like the accent, the vocabulary, words just being different, some of which you may adopt, things like that. Driving on the left side of the road, walking on the left side, just funny things like that, that you kind of have to get used to. And then I think there are also some more broad, just deeper cultural differences that stood out, such as what we've talked about with the pace of life being a lot slower and more chill, the education system being different. Something that really stood out to me was the Maori culture, which is the indigenous population of New Zealand, and though they are the marginalized group there, I think their culture was so well integrated into just the local life of New Zealand in a way that I think the states could learn a lot from. So that was definitely something that was cool to notice.
Thank you. What if anyone else or for Australia? Anyone have any comments? Whitney?
Just like a quick comment that when I would describe things to people, and people would be like, "What's the difference?" Honestly, something that was nice about studying abroad in Australia was that there's a lot of similarities, at least in like beliefs and opinions and the way that people operate. Like, I would not say there was a very big culture shock in a way that was like detrimental or difficult to navigate. Like was said, there was a lot of things that were kind of like funny or silly, but nothing that was a huge deal. That would be like, wow, like super culture shock. But one thing that was awesome was I felt way safer in Australia than anywhere in the US. Like you could walk home late at night, no one would bother you. You didn't feel threatened ever. So that was one thing that was awesome, was it felt super safe, which was cool.
That's great to hear. One thing that I definitely recommend before you depart is take time to learn more about the country you're going to. So I can't tell you how many, students head off to Australia or New Zealand. They don't know who the prime minister is or how the government works, or even just some of the basic information you really should know before you're going, because Australians or New Zealanders may ask you about, a topic or something related to their country, and you should be able to have that conversation. So, and there's lots of great Australian and New Zealand films out there too. So definitely take a look before you leave. Okay, let's move on to some of the more general topics. And there were a couple questions that came in about any tips or advice that you would give and recommended do's and don'ts. So we'll just sort of lump those together. And does anyone have any tips or advice you'd like to give out, or recommendations on things not to do while you're studying abroad? What about tips or advice for like packing or traveling or,
Oh my gosh, I have
Academic.
kind of a funny story.
okay.
I forgot about the seasons there being completely opposite. And I showed up in September and I was so cold. It was like peak summer, like Southern California. And I showed up with like my bikinis, like ready to go to the beach. And I was so cold. All I had was like jeans and I was like really cold. So just remember that the seasons are completely opposite and it's still cold there in September. It's like the end of winter or end of fall, I guess. Or I don't know. It's spring started in October, I think. Like end of October. So yeah.
But you stayed until January, so you still got the heat at the end.
Oh yeah. Also, I would even like the locals I met there were like, it's so good. They say so good. It's so good that you stayed until like January because summer starts like December 1st. So like a lot of people's classes end like December 15th. Like also my classes ended like or like before finals week or like the first day of finals week. And it's good to have that month not just to like travel, but that's like the best like weather while you're there. So if you could stay and like find at least till then that's like the ideal situation.
I have some New Zealand clothing tips as well. So, if you're going to New Zealand, you're probably going to be doing at least some backpacking, and they they have like huts there. So it's really easy to do. You don't need like a tent. You just like need a sleeping bag and, some like cookware, but they're amazing. And New Zealand doesn't have really any like dangerous like animals or anything. It's like super like safe and friendly place to be outdoors. But the most dangerous part of being outside in New Zealand is the weather because it's a like small island, so it can change like that. Like I'm talking like sun is shining and then 10 minutes later like pouring rain. And so it's really important to they say their cotton is rotten. Don't wear cotton clothes because if you're wearing cotton and it gets wet, you're going to get cold. But if you're wearing like wool or like, wool is really good, but then also like polyester, that'll keep you way warmer. So make sure to have like some outdoor clothes that are not cotton. Um, and make sure to bring good rain gear, like a good rain pants, good rain jacket. I wear a poncho that keeps out the rain really well. So yeah, definitely good stuff to bring.
To kind of add on to that, I was recommended to bring all of my hiking and camping gear, and I didn't listen and only brought some, and I regretted it immediately because even if you think you aren't the biggest hiker or camper, you will go on a trip. You're in New Zealand and you will do it. I My first time camping was a 2-week camping trip. Um, and I was not prepared at all. I ended up trying to thrift a bunch of stuff. I thrifted a pair of hiking boots. It was kind of a mess. So if you have hiking gear, bring it, even if you don't think you'll use it, because you will.
And if you don't have hiking gear, I found, and you get there and you still need a couple things or you forgot something, I found Facebook Marketplace and this website in New Zealand they use called Trade Me to be both very good resources for just finding stuff. I got a really cheap hiking backpack because I just didn't bring one. And I think some of the universities also rent out gear too, which I did a couple times, or just rent out equipment if you want to take um other things on your trips. Like I think we rented a stove one time just because no one had one. That kind of thing.
Yeah, my school, I didn't actually do it, but I have a lot of friends who did like backpacking and stuff. They had a rental program. I don't know if it was through the school or like an adventure club vibe, but I think like all of them have, or at least UNSW has it.
Another kind of rogue tip or piece of advice, maybe you do, maybe you don't, maybe you don't listen to me, but I bought a car when I was there through Facebook Marketplace with 6 of my other housemates because there were 18 of us. 7 of us all pitched in and bought a 7-seater car, and that's what we did our road trips in. And then a few of our other friends also bought cars. One was there for the full year, so he kind of invested in it. And then we did all our road trips with that, and we could access a lot more of the country, and I would highly recommend doing that. I got it like off of Facebook Marketplace for relatively cheap. So
There's also this random like rental car company. I need to remember the name of it, but you can like rent it. They need people to like transport cars for them. So they let you use it for free and you get it for like a certain period of time. And you can like, they're like, oh, you pick it up here and then you drop it off here. So if you want to do like East Coast Australia, then they have like a lot of like routes that do that, but you need to buy like a one-way flight to like 1 or 2 separate places.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot, students studying in New Zealand pulling their resources and buying cars, not so much in Australia. I think because you're in major cities and then there's cheap flights from one city to another. So, yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to travel because I know this is a really popular topic. One of the questions, and I think one of you already mentioned about like the schedule for the semester and having time during the semester to be able to travel, because that was one of the things, like, are you going to have time? Are we going to have time to travel during the semester? And you absolutely will. But then you could potentially also stay on after the semester ends or even go over a little bit early. But did any of you do anything, like any trips that were connected to the university that they organized, or was all your travel sort of done on your own or with friends?
I did one trip that was through like a club at school. I did a bunch of traveling that was all with friends outside of that, but for some reason at the University of Sydney, there's this surf camp that all the exchange students do. Like it's just kind of a thing. It's like a long weekend sort of, and that was came up at the club fair week. It was like the surf club through the University of Sydney, and literally every single person I knew that was an exchange student did that one weekend or another. So that was one that was kind of like through the school. But other than that, it was just organized personally with friends.
Was that the same for everybody else, sort of traveling with friends? Okay, do you have any travel advice? I mean, I know like the New Zealand alum drove and were in cars, but places to go, where would you recommend?
I can just say the places that I went real quick, and if anybody has questions about that, there's a lot of opportunities to travel if you want to, but it's kind of funny because in the orientation, I don't really know if we're supposed to say this, but everyone will come to the same conclusion. They're like, you'll have a mid-semester break and you'll have a break the week before finals. Like, don't leave the country because something could happen and whatnot, but everyone traveled. Like it's like study week, like someone was saying there's study breaks, but that's when everyone traveled. So on mid-semester break, a group of friends, we did a road trip down the coast of Queensland. Like that's when I drove the Barrier Reef. On a different, like on a long weekend, we went on a like multi-day live aboard boat trip in the Whitsunday Islands. And then the week before finals, we went to Indonesia in Bali. And then after the school year ended, there's still kind of like a couple weeks before Christmas, and we did a road trip in the North and South Island of New Zealand, and then went to Thailand and Vietnam. So there's plenty of time to go all sorts of places.
Wow, you fit a lot in. What about other recommendations or highlights?
I did kind of the same countries as what you just said. Um, and then I also did Fiji and Samoa, and I would say if you can get to a Pacific island, those are so cool and there's so much culture there. And we like stayed on these palaces on the beach that were like homestays, and we got to know some locals, and it was really, really cool. So if you can get to the Pacific Islands, I highly recommend that too.
Another tip, since probably everyone like New Zealand and Australia will probably want to go to the Great Barrier Reef. I did it twice. Once like when I first got there, because I had friends who did it before I even like it was like they got there before me and did it before their program started. Once it starts to get like more into summer, the UV gets to be like literally boiling your skin if you go to the reef in like December. And also there's like a ton of jellyfish, so it's like hot and you have to wear like a wetsuit, so it's not as enjoyable. So we went beginning of September and we didn't have to like wear wetsuits yet because of like the jellyfish. And then it was like warm, but it wasn't like miserably hot or like we felt like our skin was burning the whole time.
I kind of did the opposite. I just stayed in New Zealand because I feel like there's so much to see there. And so I was obviously in Christchurch and did a couple of the Great Walks. Like I did the Great Walk on Stewart Island. Um, I did the Abel Tasman, and then a lot of the other, I don't know, there's just so many good like places to go. Yes, Abel Tasman. And you know, go visit Queenstown, go visit Milford Sound. It's beautiful. Wanaka's pretty cool. Those are like the like tourist highlights. And then I also did a road trip like up the North Island, and we crossed on the ferry and then, went through Wellington and just kind of road tripped our way up through Taupo and Rotorua and Tongariro National Park all the way up to Auckland and then back down. And yeah, like road tripping in New Zealand is, yes, glowworms. But it's so cool because like everywhere you're driving is like, especially on the South Island, just like literally the most beautiful place you've ever seen. And like after like a week or so of road tripping, like I just remember feeling like I just need to go stare at a wall for a while because I can't absorb any more beauty right now. Um, so yeah, so much to see, even if you don't leave the country. So
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for answering all the questions that were submitted at the time of registration. I was going to open it up now to Q&A, but I'm going to actually move forward to the thank you for attending, just in case anyone needs to sign out. I ask that you do the evaluation. This is a UC-wide effort to do these alumni panels. So if you can scan the QR code and fill it out, that would be great. But for those of you that have additional questions that you didn't ask at registration, I'd like to ask if you're comfortable just to go ahead and raise your hand or unmute, and I will go ahead and stop sharing so we can sort of see everybody. And feel free to ask any questions that you might have. If you're not comfortable unmuting, go ahead and put your question in the chat.
while we're waiting for questions, I just want to say that I'm actually moving back to Christchurch in July, or no, in August. And so for a year. So if you are in Christchurch or even in any of the other New Zealand universities and you know, want advice, you want somewhere to store your stuff, you know, after the semester ends, if you're traveling, you need help with something, like you guys got my email, like let me know. I will be there.
Can I ask what you're going to be doing?
Yeah, I'm just gonna be doing a working holiday for a year and finding some sort of job. But I love the city. I love living there, and so since I'm graduating, I just want to push off like real adult life for like a year and just go, yeah, go back.
That's awesome. Well, and just for those of you getting ready to study abroad, or actually our panelists, both Australia and New Zealand offer working holiday visas. So if you're dying to go back, you can certainly do that. I think there's an age cap on when you can go. So it's for really, you know, when you're soon out of college. Any questions? Maybe we did such a great job, or were there any that came in the chat? No, I don't see any.
Oh, Arthur's raising
Oh,
his hand.
oh, Arthur, go ahead. Are you able to unmute?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. No, I just wanted to hear more from you, Rachel and Tasha, that's talking about the internships at University of Sydney. I'm also trying to get into one of them through the ARS 2600, and I just wanted to see how the process is, how hard is it to get it, and how is handling that plus classes and just having fun in Sydney.
Yeah, so there are basically like two different types. Obviously, there's the business one and there's actual research one. Do you know which one you're more interested in?
Not super sure personally. I'm down to do both. I just wanted to be more related to either my major, which is data science, or
Mhm.
business analytics.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess you could do either in that case, but I think the business ones, like they're the one they send you like a preset like options that you can choose from, and then those are the ones where you have to actually get interviewed by them, talk to them, all that sort of stuff. And obviously the research ones are like kind of the same thing, but if you go out and find your own, there's obviously going to be no competition because it's literally just you. So I actually did a research one. So I emailed 2 or 3 different people and like they all got back to me, which is honestly crazy because I get ghosted all the time here. So they were really nice with getting back to me. Like I got interviewed, they're all like they were willing to host me for that time. And then I did get an internship at the Westmead Institute for Medical Research. And honestly, that was probably the best part of my study abroad. Like I actually did experiments and everything. And I think I'm going to get published from there. So it was just really fun and really eye-opening because you get so involved. So I definitely recommend doing an internship. I think that you can honestly contact other businesses too, like just like around. I know there's like museums and places that you can just email them and be like, oh yeah, hey, like this is my program. Like, would you be willing to host me? Honestly, everyone's really nice. Like they're probably not going to say no. So just so there are those preset options. If you're really interested in any of them, honestly go for it. But if you want to find your own, you have a much better chance of getting it. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add, Rachel.
You know what, why don't I hold off and then, because you know, I know others may want to drop off, you know, from the webinar. Are there any other questions? And then Arthur, and I know there's another student who is interested in the University of Sydney internship. If you two want to hang back, I can add information as well. Are there any other questions though about New Zealand or Australia in general? Okay, well then I'm going to go ahead and call it. And I know, thank you, whoever pasted the contact information in the chat again. And thank you to all the panelists for being here and giving up an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. And for sharing your contact information. And I'm just going to say again, you know, for all of you getting ready to leave, organize yourselves, get in the Discord group or create a Discord group for your cohort and get in touch with each other, because it's going to be nice to be able to like know people when you land. And thank you everybody for being here. and have a great rest of your quarter. And if Arthur and I think it was Emery, if you want to hang on, we can go ahead and talk about the University of Sydney. And if Tasha, you have time too, if you want to hang out. Thank you, everyone.